I never wanted to be the family disappointment. But standing in the grand ballroom of the university's annual donor gala, wearing a dress that screamed rebellion against everything the Mercer name stood for, I knew I'd finally crossed the line. My name is Lila, and this is how I burned my perfect family to the ground. For God's sake, Lila, my mother hissed, her manicured fingers digging into my arm as she pulled me behind a marble column. What were you thinking, showing up like this? I glanced down at my thrifted bohemian dress, its vibrant patterns a stark contrast to the sea of black cocktail dresses and pearls surrounding us. The disapproving whispers from my father's colleagues had followed me since I walked in. I was thinking I'd wear something that actually represents who I am, I said, meeting her panicked gaze. Instead of pretending to be Cora's carbon copy. The mention of my twin sister made my mother's face tighten. Across the room, Cora stood perfectly poised beside our father, her designer dress and practiced smile making her look like she'd stepped out of a country club catalog. The golden child doing what she did best, making the rest of us look worse by comparison. Your father's department chair is here, my mother said, smoothing her own impeccable dress. The board members, the donors, do you have any idea how this reflects on him? On all of us. Before I could respond, my father's commanding voice cut through the ambient chatter. Helen? Lila? A word, please. The crowd parted as Professor Walter Mercer strode toward us, his university medal glinting under the chandeliers. His smile was perfect, practiced, and absolutely terrifying. Would you care to explain, he said quietly, why my youngest daughter looks like she raided a thrift store? Actually, I did raid a thrift store, I said. And I'm only younger by 4 minutes. His jaw clenched. This isn't a joke, Lila. We have standards to maintain. A reputation. Your reputation, I interrupted. Not mine. A few nearby guests pretended not to watch our family drama unfolding. I caught sight of Cora, still maintaining her picture-perfect pose, though her eyes betrayed a flash of something, envy, fear, before she looked away. Perhaps, my father said, his voice dropping even lower. It's time we discussed your continued presence at the gallery. My heart stopped. The small art gallery where I worked, my one piece of freedom, my escape from the suffocating world of academia and expectations, dangled before me like bait. You wouldn't, I whispered. The building lease is in my name, he reminded me. And while I've indulged your artistic pursuits, my patience isn't infinite. The room suddenly felt too small, too hot. The whispers grew louder, the stares more obvious. My mother's hand found my arm again, but this time in warning rather than restraint. Walter, she murmured, not here. But I was already backing away, my vision blurring. You know what? Keep your lease. Keep your reputation. Keep your perfect little world with your perfect daughter who never disappoints you. Lila. My mother started, but I was already moving. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring the scandalized gasps and whispers. As I reached the door, I heard Cora call my name, her voice carrying a note of desperation I'd never heard before. I paused, turning back one last time. The scene before me was like a painting. My father's rigid stance, my mother's pleading expression, Cora's perfect facade beginning to crack. And in the background, a man I didn't recognize, watching the whole thing with calculated interest. I didn't know it then, but that man, Nathaniel Clark, would become the key to everything that followed. The catalyst for a chain of events that would tear my family's carefully constructed image apart, piece by precious piece. But that night, I just ran. 3 days after the gala disaster, I was arranging a new exhibition at my gallery when Cora walked in. She looked perfect as always, designer suit, not a hair out of place, but something was off. Her hands kept fidgeting with her purse strap, a nervous tell we'd shared since childhood. Nice of you to check if I was alive after Friday, I said, not looking up from the sculpture I was positioning. I tried calling. Did you? Must have missed it between Dad's threats and Mom's guilt trips. The click of Cora's heels echoed through the empty gallery as she approached. That's not fair, Lila. You know how they get. I finally turned to face her. Yeah, I do. And you just stand there, perfect Cora, never saying a word. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice smaller than usual. She held up her left hand, and there it was, a massive diamond catching the gallery lights. My stomach dropped. You're kidding. Nathaniel proposed last night, at the country club, in front of everyone. Her smile wavered slightly. Dad's thrilled, of course. A lawyer from the right family, the right connections. The same guy who was watching our family meltdown like it was dinner theater? I moved another sculpture, harder than necessary. How convenient. It's not like that. Nate is. She paused, searching for words. He understands how things work in our world. Your world, I corrected. Not mine. Cora's perfectly manicured fingers traced the edge of a nearby painting. Mom wants you to be my maid of honor. I barked out a laugh.
Right.
Because that won't be awkward at all. The family disappointment in whatever clearance rack dress you pick out, standing next to the golden child and her perfect match. Please don't be like this, Cora whispered. I need you there. Something in her voice made me look closer. Behind the polished exterior, I caught a glimpse of uncertainty in her eyes. The same look she'd had when we were kids, and she'd climb into my bed during thunderstorms, though she'd never admit to being scared. Why him? I asked softly. Really? Cora's facade cracked for just a moment. Because he's what I'm supposed to want.
What they want for me.
And what do you want? The gallery door chimed before she could answer. A man in an expensive suit strode in, Nathaniel Clark himself, looking every bit the successful lawyer he was supposed to be. But something about his smile didn't reach his eyes. There you are, darling, he said, wrapping an arm around Cora's waist. Your father mentioned I might find you here. He turned to me, extending his hand. Nathaniel Clark. Though I suppose I should say future brother-in-law. I didn't take his hand. Congratulations. You're getting the good twin. Lila, Cora warned. No, it's fine, Nathaniel said smoothly. Family dynamics can be complicated. Speaking of which, I had a fascinating conversation with your father about the gallery's lease situation. My blood ran cold. Did you? Yes. Fascinating legal structure. It would be a shame if anything happened to disrupt such a precarious arrangement. The threat was clear, wrapped in perfect politeness. I looked at Cora, but she was studying her shoes, the perfect daughter even now. Well, I said, forcing a smile. I should get back to work. Lots to do before Daddy Dearest decides to exercise his legal options. Nathaniel steered Cora toward the door, but she glanced back at me one last time. In that moment, I saw something I'd never noticed before. My twin sister, the golden child, looked trapped. After they left, I sat down hard on a nearby bench, my hands shaking. The gallery had been my escape, my one piece of freedom. Now, it was just another weapon they could use against me. My phone buzzed with a text from Cora. Please be my maid of honor. I need someone in my corner. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about the look in her eyes, the careful way Nathaniel had watched her, and our father's growing influence over my life. Something had to give. I just didn't know it would be everything. The bridal boutique was exactly as pretentious as I'd expected. While Cora tried on her 5th wedding dress, I scrolled through my phone, ignoring our mother's disapproving glances. The appointment had been going for 2 hours, and I'd already downed 3 complimentary champagnes. Lila, my mother said sharply, put that phone away. Your sister needs your opinion. I looked up just as Cora emerged in a dress that probably cost more than my gallery made in a month. She stood before the mirror, tugging at the lace sleeves, her reflection showing something I hadn't seen before. Fear. It's perfect, our mother gushed. Nathaniel will love it. Cora's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric. Could I have a moment alone with Lila? Mom's smile faltered, but she nodded, heading toward the boutique's front desk. The moment she was out of earshot, Cora's perfect posture crumbled. I can't breathe in this thing, she whispered. I stood up, moving closer. Then take it off. You know what I mean. Her eyes met mine in the mirror. Last night, I found something on Nate's phone. My champagne buzz evaporated. What kind of something? Messages. To Dad.
About the gallery.
About you. She turned to face me, the expensive dress rustling. They're planning something, Lila. Something to force you out. The room seemed to tilt. Show me. Cora pulled out her phone, hands shaking as she pulled up screenshots. There they were, messages between my father and future brother-in-law, discussing legal strategies to terminate my lease, to pressure the gallery's artists to withdraw their work, to destroy everything I'd built. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice hollow. Because. Cora's voice cracked. Because last night, Nate got drunk. Really drunk. He started talking about Dad's research grants, about irregularities in the funding. He knows things, Lila. Things that could ruin Dad. And he thinks it's funny. The boutique's chandelier cast prismatic shadows across her wedding dress as she continued. He's not who I thought he was. None of them are.
But I don't know how to.
To what? Back out? Stand up to them. The words came out harsher than I intended.
You don't understand.
Mom and Dad have already announced it to everyone. The venue's booked, the invitations are ordered. Dad's whole department will be there, his donors, his reputation, I finished. Always his precious reputation. A sales associate approached with another dress, but one look at our faces sent her retreating. Cora sank onto the platform, yards of white silk pooling around her. Do you remember, she said quietly, when we were kids and we used to pretend we were running away to join the circus? I sat beside her, careful not to wrinkle the dress. You wanted to be a trapeze artist. And you wanted to paint the circus posters. She smiled faintly. When did we stop believing we could just escape? I haven't, I said. Cora's phone buzzed, a message from Nate. Her face went pale as she read it.
What?
I asked. He's meeting Dad for drinks tonight, to discuss the gallery situation. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. What are you going to do? I stood up, my mind racing. First, I'm getting you out of that dress. Then, I'm going to need those screenshots. Lila. You showed me for a reason, Cora. Either you trust me or you don't. She hesitated, then nodded. Just promise me something? Whatever you're planning, be careful. Nate isn't just Dad's lawyer anymore. He's becoming Dad. Our mother's voice carried from the front of the store, calling us back to the world of wedding plans and perfect appearances. But something had shifted. In showing me those messages, Cora had finally chosen a side. I watched my twin sister disappear into the changing room, still wearing a dress meant for a life she didn't want. The champagne glasses on the side table caught the light, throwing shadows that looked like prison bars across the floor. They wanted to take my gallery? Fine. But they'd forgotten something important. In a family built on secrets, knowledge was the deadliest weapon of all. And I'd just been armed. The screenshots from Cora's phone burned a hole in my pocket as I locked up the gallery that night. Rain drummed against the windows, matching my darkening mood. I'd spent hours going through Dad's research grants, looking for the irregularities Nate had mentioned, but hit nothing but dead ends. A motorcycle's rumble cut through the rain, stopping outside. I didn't recognize the rider until he pulled off his helmet, revealing a face that didn't belong in my carefully curated world of art and family expectations. You're getting wet, he called out, grinning. I hesitated at the gallery door. That's generally what happens in the rain. Want a ride? He patted the seat behind him. Unless you're afraid of ruining your fancy clothes. I glanced down at my paint-stained jeans and smiled despite myself. I don't even know your name.
Hula Collins.
I'm doing the metalwork next door. He extended a grease-stained hand. Been watching you fight with that sculpture all day. Lila, I said, taking his hand. And I wasn't fighting with it. I was negotiating. The sculpture was winning. The rain was soaking through my shirt, but I didn't move. Behind me lay the gallery, my prison and sanctuary. Ahead sat a stranger offering escape, even if just for a moment. Come on, he said softly. Live a little dangerously. I thought about Nate's messages, about Cora's trapped expression in that wedding dress, about my father's carefully constructed world of control and appearances. I got on the bike. Ryder took us through the city's back streets, past industrial districts where his world lived. The rain stung my face, but I felt more alive than I had in weeks. We ended up at a small diner, the kind that would give my mother a heart attack. "So," he said, sliding into a booth, "want to tell me what you're running from?" "Who says I'm running?" "Your face does. Every time you look back toward that gallery." The waitress brought coffee in chipped mugs. I wrapped my hands around mine, soaking in the warmth. "My family," I finally said, "is trying to take the gallery from me." "Well, my father and future brother-in-law are." "Sounds complicated. You have no idea." I pulled out my phone, showing him Nate's messages. "They're planning to destroy everything I've built, and I can't figure out why." "Not really." Ryder studied the messages, his expression darkening. "I know this guy. Nathaniel Clark, right? His firm handled the contracts when the development company tried to force out all the small businesses in my neighborhood last year." My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "What happened?" "They succeeded. My mom lost her bakery. 15 years of work, gone because some rich guys decided they needed another luxury apartment complex." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The gallery's location, the sudden interest from Nate and my father, the pressure to sell. "It's not about me at all, is it?" I whispered. "The gallery's just the first piece. They're going to redevelop the whole street." "Probably." Ryder's hand found mine across the table. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" I stared at our joined hands, so different. His calloused from honest work, mine stained with paint from chasing dreams. "I don't know. Fighting them means fighting my whole family. Everything I was raised to be." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." The diner's neon sign cast alternating shadows across his face, honest and open in a way I'd forgotten people could be. "My mom still has all the paperwork from our fight with Clark's firm," he said. "Every dirty trick they tried to pull could be useful." "Why would you help me?" "Because sometimes the people who seem to have everything are the ones most trapped by it." He squeezed my hand. "And because you looked like you needed an escape route." My phone buzzed. Another message from Cora about wedding plans, about keeping up appearances, about staying in line. I turned the phone face down. "Tell me more about these development plans," I said to Ryder. "And everything else they tried to hide." The rain continued outside, washing away the boundaries between his world and mine. The Sunday dinner invitation from my parents arrived like a summons to an execution. I hadn't planned to accept until Ryder offered to come with me. Now, watching him adjust his borrowed tie in my gallery's window, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. "Stop fidgeting," I said, straightening his collar. "They're going to hate you no matter what you wear." Comforting. He caught my trembling hands in his. "We don't have to do this. We could just leave, start that artists collective we talked about." The temptation was strong. Over the past 2 weeks, Ryder had shown me a different world, one where success wasn't measured in social connections or family approval. But the stack of development plans we'd uncovered in his mother's old files kept me anchored to this fight. "They need to see what they're trying to destroy," I said. The drive to my parents' house felt like crossing enemy lines. Ryder whistled low when we pulled up to the mansion. Suddenly, a lot of things make sense. Cora's car was already there, along with Nate's luxury sedan.
Perfect.
My mother opened the door, her smile freezing at the sight of Ryder. "Lila, darling, we weren't expecting additional guests." "Surprise," I said, pushing past her. The scene in the living room could have been a painting titled "Upper-Class Disappointment." My father stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, while Nate and Cora sat perfectly posed on the sofa. The only thing missing was genuine emotion. "So," my father said, eyeing Ryder's tattoos, "this is why you've been ignoring our calls." "Actually, I've been busy investigating why my brother-in-law-to-be is trying to force me out of my gallery." I pulled out the development plans. "Care to explain this, Nate?" The papers hit the coffee table with a satisfying thud. Cora's face went pale, but Nate barely flinched. "Business is business," he said smoothly. "The neighborhood's changing. Progress is inevitable."
Progress.
Ryder stepped forward. "Is that what you called it when you forced my mother's bakery into bankruptcy?" Recognition flickered across Nate's face. "The Collins property. That was unfortunate." "Lila," my father cut in, Whatever you think you've discovered, save it. I turned to Cora. Did you know about what your perfect fiancé really does? She wouldn't meet my eyes. The answer is clear. Enough. My father's voice cracked like a whip. Lila, this childish rebellion has gone on long enough. First the gallery, now this inappropriate relationship. You're throwing away everything we've built for you. Built for me? I laughed. You built a cage and called it protection. You raised us to be terrified of disappointing you, of being anything less than perfect. We raised you to understand your responsibilities. My mother interjected. To our family, our position. Your position? Ryder's quiet voice cut through the tension. Is that what you call destroying other families' livelihoods? My father slammed his glass down. I won't be lectured in my own home by some mechanic. Welder. Ryder and I corrected simultaneously. Get out. My father's face was red. Both of you. And Lila, if you leave with him, don't bother coming back. The gallery lease will be terminated tomorrow. I looked at Cora, silently pleading for support. She gripped Nate's hand tighter and looked away. You know what's funny? I said, backing toward the door. I always thought Cora was the lucky one, but she's just as trapped as I was. The only difference is, I'm choosing to break free. Lila, please. My mother called after us. Think about what you're doing. I paused at the door, taking in the scene one last time. My father's rage, my mother's tears, Cora's silent submission, and Nate's smug satisfaction. I am thinking, I said. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking for myself. Ryder took my hand as we walked out. Behind us, I heard the sound of breaking glass and my mother's muffled sob. You okay? He asked as we reached his bike. I wasn't, but I would be. Let's go start a revolution, I said, climbing on behind him. The engine roared to life, drowning out my family's calls to return. We rode away from my past, toward an uncertain but free future. And I didn't look back. 2 months after walking out of my parents' house, I stood in my empty gallery, surrounded by bare walls and echoing space. The eviction notice on the door made it official. I'd lost everything I'd built. Ryder found me sitting on the floor, staring at the last painting left to pack. The truck's loaded, he said softly. Mom's got dinner waiting. I traced the outline of the frame. Did you know this was my first sale? Some rich lady bought it because it matched her couch. A bitter laugh escaped. God, I was so proud. We'll build something new, he said, but I heard the strain in his voice. The truth was we were drowning. The artists' collective we'd started in Ryder's warehouse space was struggling. My father's influence ran deep. Galleries wouldn't touch my work. Collectors mysteriously backed out of deals. Even Ryder's welding contracts had dried up, thanks to Nate's connections with local developers. My phone buzzed, another text from Cora. I'd been ignoring them since her wedding invitations arrived last week, each envelope like a perfectly crafted knife to the heart. Your sister again? I nodded. She keeps saying she needs to tell me something important. Probably another lecture about family duty. The gallery's front door chimed. I looked up, expecting the landlord, but instead found Joan Collins, Ryder's mother, standing there with a determined expression. You too need to see this, she said, holding up a tablet. It just hit the news. The headline made my blood freeze. University professor under investigation for research fund misappropriation. My father's photo stared back at me, looking older than I remembered. There's more, Joan said, scrolling down. The law firm handling the investigation. Let me guess. I cut in. Clark and Associates. She nodded. Nate's turning on them, Lila. He's using your father's scandal to boost his own reputation. Ryder's hand found mine. This could be our chance. If your father's vulnerable.
No.
I stood up, my legs shaky. I wanted to save the gallery, not destroy my family. They didn't show you the same consideration, Joanne said gently. Before I could respond, the door chimed again. This time it was Cora, looking nothing like the perfect daughter I remembered. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her eyes red from crying. I tried to warn you, she said. About Nate, about everything. But you wouldn't answer my calls. Warn me about what? The development plans weren't just about your gallery. Nate's firm is targeting the whole university district. Dad's research funds, the property deals, it's all connected. She pulled out a USB drive. I found these files on Nate's computer. He's been planning this for months, using our family to build his case. My head spun. Why are you showing me this now? Because I finally realized something. Cora's voice cracked. We're not just losing a gallery or a neighborhood. We're losing ourselves. And I can't watch it happen anymore. The weight of everything, the gallery, my parents, Cora's revelation, crashed down. I sank back to the floor, clutching the USB drive. What am I supposed to do with this? I whispered. Even if we expose Nate, it'll destroy Dad. The university, our family name. Maybe some things need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt, Ryder said. I looked around my empty gallery one last time. The bare walls held shadows of everything I'd lost, and everything I still had to lose. If we do this, I said slowly, there's no going back. No more perfect family, no more social status, no more safety net. Cora sat beside me, her shoulder touching mine like when we were kids sharing secrets. Maybe that's exactly what we need. My phone buzzed again, a message from my mother. Your father needs you. Please come home. The irony wasn't lost on me. They only wanted me back now that their world was crumbling. So, Ryder said, what's it going to be? Revenge or redemption? I stared at the USB drive in my hand, feeling the weight of two possible futures. Either way, someone's world was about to burn. I just had to decide which match to light. The university's annual donor gala looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago. Except this time I wasn't here to rebel. I was here to end it all. Ready. Ryder squeezed my hand, looking sharp in a properly fitted suit this time. I touched the USB drive in my clutch.
No.
But that's never stopped me before. Inside, the elite of academia mingled, oblivious to the bomb about to drop. My father stood at his usual spot by the fireplace, but his confident stance seemed forced. The investigation had taken its toll. Nate spotted us first. His smile faltered as he steered Cora in our direction. Bold of you to show up here, he said quietly. Funny, I was about to say the same thing. I glanced at my sister. Everything set. Cora nodded almost imperceptibly. The engagement ring on her finger caught the light, for the last time, if all went according to plan. Ladies and gentlemen, the university president called from the podium. If I could have your attention. My father moved to take his usual place of honor, but froze when he saw me. I held his gaze as I walked toward the stage. Actually, I said, loud enough to carry, I have something to share first. Nate stepped forward. Security. I wouldn't, Ryder warned, positioning himself between Nate and me. The room hushed as I reached the podium. My mother's face had gone pale, but she didn't move to stop me. Many of you know me as Professor Mercer's rebellious daughter. I started. The one who chose art over academia, disappointment over duty. But what you don't know is the real cost of maintaining the perfect facade this university runs on. I plugged in the USB drive. The projector hummed to life, displaying emails, contracts, and financial records across the wall. These documents show how Nathaniel Clark orchestrated the systematic destruction of small businesses in the university district, using inside information from my father's position to facilitate land grabs and development deals. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nate's composed mask cracked. You have no proof. Actually, Cora stepped forward, her voice steady. I provided the proof, along with documentation of how you used our engagement to gain access to university records and my father's research funds. My father's face had turned ashen. Cora, what have you done? What you taught us to do, Dad. I answered for her. Protect the family name. Just not in the way you expected. Nate lunged for the podium, but Ryder intercepted him. In the chaos, my mother reached my father's side, gripping his arm as he swayed. By exposing this now, I continued over the growing murmurs before the official investigation concludes. We're giving the university a chance to address it internally, to make it right. The president stood, his expression grave. Security, please escort Mr. Clark out. Walter, my office.
Now.
As Nate was led away, he turned back. You really think this changes anything? You're still the family disappointment living with a… Careful. Cora cut in, slipping off her engagement ring. That's my sister you're talking about. The ring hit the floor with a metallic ping that echoed through the stunned silence. My father stepped toward me, looking suddenly old. Why? He whispered. Why not just let it go? Because you taught us that family is everything, I said. But you never understood what that really meant. Security arrived to escort him to the president's office. As he passed, he paused. I'm sorry, he said softly, for everything. It wasn't enough. It might never be enough, but it was a start. Later, in the empty ballroom, Cora, Ryder, and I sat on the stage steps, sharing a bottle of champagne. So, Cora said, what now? I looked at Ryder, who smiled. The warehouse space is still available, big enough for a gallery and a welding studio. And a dance studio? Cora asked quietly. I hear those are good businesses these days. I handed her the champagne. Welcome to the revolution, sis. Outside, camera flashes lit up the night as reporters gathered. Tomorrow, everything would change. The perfect family would crumble. The carefully maintained image would shatter. But sitting there with my sister and the man I loved, I finally understood sometimes you have to burn it all down to build something real. 1 year later, I stood in our new gallery space, watching sunset light filter through the industrial windows. The renovated warehouse had exceeded our dreams. Art on one side, Ryder's welding studio on the other, and Cora's dance studio upstairs. The sound of her students' music drifted down, mixing with the hum of Ryder's tools. The opening reception was in an hour. My first show since everything fell apart and came back together. Need help hanging that last piece? Joanne appeared beside me, gesturing to the covered canvas I'd been avoiding all day.
Not yet, I said.
Waiting for someone. As if on cue, the door chimed. My mother stepped in, looking smaller somehow in her simple dress. No designer labels, no perfect facade. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said. She touched one of the paintings gently. Your father wanted to be here too, but community service keeps him busy? The bitterness had faded to something softer, almost like pity. He's different now, she said. We both are. Losing everything. It shows you what matters. The door chimed again. Cora bounded down the stairs, still in her dance clothes, as Ryder emerged from his studio, wiping grease from his hands. Ready? He asked. I nodded, moving to the covered canvas. My mother gasped softly as I revealed it, a portrait of our family, but not as we were. In this version, we stood in the warehouse, surrounded by art and tools and dancing figures. My father smiled, my mother's posture was relaxed, and Cora and I stood together, neither one in the other's shadow. It's how we could be, I explained, if we choose it. My mother's hand trembled as she reached out, then stopped short of touching the canvas. When did you paint this? After Dad's sentencing. When you finally left that house and got your own apartment. I stepped closer. When you started being my mom instead of just the perfect professor's wife. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Lila. For everything. I know. The door chimed one final time. My father stood there, looking uncertain in clothes that hadn't come from a designer store. I have an hour before I need to report back, he said quietly. Cora moved first, crossing to him. Then my mother. I stayed back, watching them drift toward the painting, toward the possibility it represented. Ryder's arms slipped around my waist. You okay? Getting there. The gallery filled with people as the reception began. Art lovers mixed with welders, dance students with professors who defied the university's unofficial boycott. My father stayed in the background, but he stayed. Later, after most guests had left, I found a letter tucked under the gallery door. Nate's law firm letterhead made my stomach clench, but it wasn't from him. It was from his former partner, offering to represent local businesses in a class action suit against the development company. A chance to make things right. What are you thinking? Cora asked, reading over my shoulder. I'm thinking revenge isn't always about destroying things. I watched our father helping Ryder move some equipment, awkward but trying. Sometimes it's about building something better in the ashes. Speaking of building,
Cora grinned.
Ryder's mom told me he bought a ring. I know. I smiled. I helped pick it out. The warehouse settled around us, creaking like a living thing. Through the windows, I could see the city changing, old buildings coming down, new ones rising. But here, in this space we created, something else was growing, something real, something ours. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Dinner Sunday? I'm learning to cook. Cora peeked at the message. Are we ready for that? No, I admitted. But maybe that's the point. The portrait watched over us as we closed up for the night, its painted figures holding the promise of what we could become. Not perfect, not unbroken, but real. And really, that's the best revenge of all.